Hi, my name is Tom M. Meyer. I'll present you today a highly innovative technology for the cryptosphere. It's called Cryptographic Deposit Guarantees, and it enables high-frequency exchange of crypto assets across blockchains and intra-chain. For sure, without a third party means trustless, decentralized, and fully cryptographically. So let's jump into that. You see a little picture of mine. I give you just an understanding in the beginning for what I use, or for what you use, or we are using in the crypto industry, cryptographic deposit guarantee. Well, the main reason or the main purpose is to send crypto coins in high speed, means real time. A good metaphor is to imagine you're sending your coins as fast as an email. And it has two main applications. These CDGs, we say, or cryptographic deposit guarantees, can transfer almost every crypto asset in real time, intra-chain. Intra-chain means you're sending one Bitcoin, for example, from one wallet, from your wallet to another wallet, another Bitcoin wallet. It means within the same blockchain. And the next application is a real-time cross-chain swap. That means you're sending in real time, for example, an Ethereum from your Ethereum wallet to a Bitcoin wallet in exchange for a Bitcoin. That means, just to sum it up, that means you can exchange these assets across blockchains. Why is that technology crucial for decentralized exchange technology? First of all, when you look nowadays at the market, we have a highly centralized exchange market, and we think that this has two main reasons. One is very obvious, because the comfort for the users to use a central crypto exchange is very high. They have a good user experience. But the second reason is more crucial, more important. A central crypto exchange offers real-time trading, right? At least the major players in the market. That means you can buy and sell your crypto asset, crypto coins immediately. You buy a Bitcoin, you sell it, you buy another altcoin, hold it just for 5 minutes, sell it again, think about scalping the market, all these things. And this is the main reason why these crypto exchanges have a lot of liquidity. Because high frequency trading brings liquidity into the market. You can also say, if you look, for example, in stock markets or in nanosecond or nano trading scenarios or high frequency trading scenarios, what actually happens with these is they are flooding the markets with liquidity. And this is one problem of decentralized exchange technology, because nowadays, we will go into it with, for example, atomic cross-chain swaps. We do not have technology in a decentralized way that enables high-frequency trading, but that we are solving with the cryptographic deposit guarantees. Why is a CDG revolutionary in blockchain technology? For a simple reason, because even if you look at the fastest blockchains we have nowadays, for example, Neo, they can transact around about 1,000 transactions per second, but this is a major problem of blockchains, that you cannot transfer your coins in real time as fast as an email with blockchains. There is another problem attached to that. It's known as scaling, the scaling problem. Maybe you have followed up with this discussion last year. It has to do that when you're flooding a blockchain with transactions, then you bring the consensus method, or the whole network, to a peak, and then it slows down, and it takes hours maybe until your coins get then mined, or you can transfer your coins to another party. So it is highly appreciated, because we can also, as we'll see now, with this as a side effect, bring a good solution for scaling of blockchains. Which industry is being disrupted with cryptographic deposit guarantee technology? Very simple, central crypto exchanges. We prefer the term risky central crypto exchanges because there are a lot of problems attached to central exchanges. You might have heard about it. They get hacked, they do price manipulation, fraud, a lot of things are going there. I don't know if you heard, this was today a Canadian centralized exchange was again hacked. They claimed that this was a bug in their software and they lost all the bitcoins of their users. This is very disappointing because the users are suffering from that. Nobody wants to lose their valued bitcoins or other coins. I think maybe if you're following up the discussion currently in the crypto community, the decentralized exchange is the hottest topic. And this is why CDG technology is of so high interest, because it brings something totally new to the table: frequency, high frequency, and real-time transactions intra and across blockchains. Okay, let's jump into it. A little short overview of the agenda. I give you a simple recap, a little short crash course about on-chain transaction model by Satoshi Nakamoto. If you're an expert, no worry, it takes us just a minute. And if you're a non-expert, let's say, also no worry, I use just illustrations. There's no mathematics. We are not going deeply into cryptography here. Then we look at what is a CDG, how to use it in an intra-chain setting. We compare a CDG with an on-chain transaction as defined by Nakamoto. Then we are looking into a highly interesting technology as well, the atomic cross-chain swap, or better known also as hashed time lock contract. That is at the top of the technology, you can say. This is at the moment the technology all decentralized exchanges are focused on, because that is actually the way or the basic, the discussion of how to develop a decentralized exchange on top of this atomic cross-chain swaps. And we want to show, as said, a new technology to this. We are showing CDGs in a cross-chain setting and compare then in the end the hash time lock contract, means atomic cross-chain swap, and the CDGs. Okay, let's jump into it and let's make a simple recap crash course on on-chain transactions as defined by Satoshi Nakamoto. Satoshi says, and that's, I think everybody of you used it, a wallet is a key pair. Yeah, we're actually applying or using public key cryptography. And with this wallet, you can send that to another party. In this case, let's say you are sending 1 Bitcoin to Alice. And what you actually do is you're writing a text message. A transaction, a blockchain transaction, is nothing else, you can say, as a text message. And in a very simple way, you're adding your public key, and you're adding the public key. It's now the purple key of Alice, so the receiver. You give the amount to send, and you then signature this by digital signature algorithm that just ensures that everybody who knows your public key can verify that you actually signed, or it was your will to sign this transaction or send this transaction. It's just a verification process, or you can also say the private keys identifies you uniquely. What then happens, you send this text message signed to the blockchain network. If you're expert, for sure, but we'll talk now a bit Bitcoin, just a side note, you might now say, I also will have maybe an input and 2 outputs with a change address. This is all, we don't want to talk about that. For me, it's important that everybody can follow up with this. So just focus on this simple illustration here, but it is actually what's ongoing. You're sending that to the blockchain nodes, and what's happening at the blockchain nodes, each of them keep a copy of the blockchain, and one of these nodes will receive your text message, means your raw transaction, your Bitcoin transaction, and it verifies it, it collects it, it will redistribute it to other Bitcoin nodes, and then the mining process starts. And this is now important to understand. A transaction, by definition, by Nakamoto's definition, is finished once your transaction have been included to the next block in the blockchain. And you have heard, you know that maybe, a blockchain is a consensus method. That means all nodes, or at least the majority of them, should include your message, your transaction in the next block. This is how they are reaching consensus. This is how double spending is actually avoided. But it is a consequence that this takes time, and we refer to that as block latency. Now, in case of Bitcoin, mining takes, in an optimistic case, around about 10 minutes. So it takes 10 minutes at least once your transaction is added to the next block. And if you're waiting for a cryptographically secure transaction, means commonly we're waiting for 3 confirmations, then you have 3 times this block latency. That means you're waiting, in an optimistic case, 30 minutes. So for me, I showed you that because I wanted to show you where, or what is the cause for the block latency, why it takes so long to send a Bitcoin from your wallet to your friend's wallet, for example. Okay, let's look what is a CDG, what is a cryptographic deposit guarantee, and what is different to an on-chain transaction. I'll explain you that using a theoretical model. We call that a meta swap. And let's say Alice wants to send 1 Bitcoin to Bob without any block latency. In our theoretical model, I'll tell you about that in a second, why it's purely theoretical. Alice has 1 Bitcoin wallet here with exactly 1 Bitcoin, and let's say she wants to send this Bitcoin to Bob. Then she has 2 options here. She signs an on-chain transaction and causes block latency, means Bob has a delay of 30 minutes in an optimistic case until his Bitcoin arrives in his wallet, cryptographically secure. She has a second option, and it's very exotic. She can also send her private key directly to Bob and causes no block latency. Why is this so? Because when she sends her private key to Bob, Bob also has the private key that gives him access to 1 Bitcoin, and we don't have any on-chain transactions, means we do not utilize any consensus method in the blockchain. You can say the Bitcoin stays unmoved in the blockchain, and therefore there is no block latency. Well, the Bitcoin Bob can access then. And as a result, we have removed the block latency. But you will say immediately, I know that, Thomas, you cannot do that. You cannot send directly your private key from one person to another, and you should not do that. That's correct. Because both have the same private key, and means both can sign an on-chain transaction and access to Bitcoin. So that's not a safe transaction. This is why I said a meta swap is just a purely theoretical model. It's a thought experiment. But it shows you what a CDG in a transaction is doing. It changes the ownership of the underlying, means crypto assets, crypto coins, or Bitcoin or whatever, instead of using on-chain transactions. And we're causing another problem here because we cannot exchange exact quantities. In our model now, we just send exactly 1 Bitcoin. Now let's see how we can solve that and what is a CDG in nature. A cryptographic deposit guarantee is a distributed key generator. Let me present that quickly. Let's imagine these circles here represent nodes in a decentralized network, and a distributed key generator is doing or computing a distributed private key across these nodes. The special thing about it is that each of those nodes just knows a secret share, means a part of the key, but they do not know the key or the private key as a whole. The second consequence is they are computing a common public key. A CDG is basically a wallet with a distributed private key and a common public key. Now, we talked about that. Nobody knows the private key, and it has a common public key. Let's jump quickly into detail. I prepared a PDF for you. It's from Aniket Kate and dates back to a talk, a thesis defense talk. Aniket Kate is one guy, one cryptographer and scientist working on distributed key generation, this topic. Another one, by the way, is Ian Goldberg. He's also legendary. He was one of those guys in the beginning of the internet. Maybe you have heard about Netscape. It was one of the first browsers. He found at that time important security breach. So let's jump into that. And he has an interesting slide I want to show you. It gives you a better understanding what a distributed key generator is doing. You see here 4 nodes as in this illustration. And what they will do is they compute a distributed private key. And everything starts with the dealer in a distributed key generation system or crypto system. And the dealer, imagine Alice is creating a deposit guarantee. What she is then actually in the context of the crypto system, she is the dealer. She initiates the process to generate this distributed private key across the other nodes. But the dealer, as well as all nodes here, will not know the whole private key. Here we don't have to go into the dealer switch. That's too much details. But this graph or this illustration is very interesting because it shows you actually what's happening in this crypto system. The nodes compute all secret shares, and in the end, as here presented in the center of this slide, you can reconstruct the private key by the key shares or the secret shares of these nodes. But as you see, it's expressed cryptographically correct. The first number is the number of nodes a distributed key generator is utilizing, and the second one is the threshold, because it also uses threshold cryptography. What does that mean? That's very practical, because T1 means, because it's by definition T+1, so it means that you need 2 nodes of those 4 to reconstruct the private key. This is here illustrated in the center of the slide. So we'll not need to request the secret share from all nodes. No, it's just necessary or sufficient to reach out. The threshold means 2 nodes to reconstruct the private key. That brings a lot more security into that. Okay, then you might say how that works. It is working because a distributed key generator is utilizing 2 other crypto systems, or has 2 building blocks. One is Shamir's secret sharing, and the other one is Feldman's variable secret sharing scheme. So that's poorly the poor cryptography behind it, but I wanted to show you a little bit more in deep what the distributed key generator is doing. Okay, now we have a good imagination. What is a CDG? It is, simply speaking, a private key nobody knows, not these nodes here holding the secret key. They don't know the private key in total, or the whole private key. Neither does the creator of the CDG knows the private key, or everyone else. No one knows it. Now let's jump into the second part. I was already explaining that on with Aniket Kate's slide, but it's crucial to understand. When you're contacting a threshold means a majority, the majority of nodes holding these secret shares, and ask them, please send me back your secret share, then you can reconstruct the private key again. Okay, by the way, just for the next slides, I'll refer to these nodes as escrow nodes. You always know an escrow node is nothing else than a node that holds a secret share of a distributed private key. Okay, I showed you already the thesis document. Okay. Now let's look into what a CDG, how it works in an intra-chain transaction in comparison to an on-chain transaction. We saw that model here, the slides before, when we discussed the meter swap theoretical model. Now we will change it, because now Alice, when she wants to send Bob her Bitcoin, has a third option. She's using a cryptographic deposit guarantee. So what does that imply? When you remember the slides of Aniket Cade, then you understand that the dealer or the creator, in this case Alice, can initiate this computation of the CDG. And as a consequence, in our implementation, she has also a key pair that gives her full control over this CDG. It's expressed that she, with this public key here, with the blue key, that she is the owner of the cryptographic deposit guarantee. When she wants to send Bitcoin, one Bitcoin, with the CDG, she first sends the Bitcoin, her Bitcoin, to the public key of the CDG, in this case, this green key. And the consequence of this is that the Bitcoin gets bound, it gets like freezed, it's freezed into the CDG because nobody knows the private key, and so nobody can access it. And that, by the way, solves the first major or core problem of this meta swap theoretical model, because we said both parties, when we send private key, has the private key. We cannot do that, but once we are using a CDG, we can transact with this because nobody knows the private key. Okay, let's check out how an intra-chain transaction now completes. Also, Bob for sure has a public key pair, or a key pair, and that gives him access to his CDGs in his wallet. And when Alice wants to send Bob her CDG, she signs a message simply containing her public key, the public key of Bob. She signs it with her private key and sends that message to each node, to each escrow node, means holding a secret share of the CDG. And what these nodes will do, they see, the message is signed by Alice, I will change the ownership from my blue key to the purple key. That is a simple change of ownership, what's happening. And finally, after this transaction, only Bob can now send the CDG or reveal its private key. This is the two things you can do with a cryptographic deposit guarantee. You can send it to someone, and the second thing is you can reveal a private key that gives you the access to the underlying, in this example, the Bitcoin. Okay, let's compare that to an on-chain transaction. If you are an expert or into blockchain technology or got already a glimpse, how we can transact that in real time. Now, let's talk about that. First, look into the on-chain transaction. When I, let's say, want to send a Bitcoin using Nakamoto's transaction model to Bob, I sign an on-chain transaction, and with this I cause block latency, and that's here illustrated with this red clock. If Bob receives my Bitcoin, let's say in an optimistic case half an hour, let's assume we want to have cryptographically secure transactions, so we're waiting for three confirmations. Even if we just wait for one confirmation, we have to wait around about 10 minutes, also in an optimistic case for sure. And Bob now sends it to Clara, which he's also causing block latency again. And they have also to wait half an hour and half an hour and a half an hour if they transact on this on-chain transaction model. So this is a disadvantage of the on-chain transaction model. Now let's compare that to a CDG transaction. Yes, the creator of a CDG or the dealer causes a single time, an on-chain, he's using an on-chain transaction to send the crypto coin, stay with Bitcoin, the Bitcoin to the public key of the CDG. So he's causing block latency once. But now the exciting part comes. Once, let's say, Alice wants to send her CDG to Bob, they do this in less than a second. Why? If you remember, we said the consensus method is of a blockchain. Now let's take a coin. I like it because it completely uses proof of stake and it's simple to explain. It's black coin. And what actually happens in the proof of stake consensus method is that they are sum up all transactions in a block and then sending this block from one stakeholder to another. It's called the validator, and these validators signing the block. And you need to reach at least the majority, so 51% of the stakeholders, that the block then gets added to the blockchain. That's the consensus. Now you can imagine that a blockchain like Blackcoin have, let's say, 500 or 1,000 stakeholders, or even more. The more the better, because the higher at a higher degree it's decentralized. The more stakeholder they have in the proof of stake protocol. So they're sending out 500 or 1,000 messages. When a computer sends a message from one computer to another, it's not for free. It also causes latency just because of the internet. Why the data have to travel on the wire to the other computer, and that causes latency. But this is a physical latency. We cannot get rid of this, but it's understandable because we refer to this benchmark as communication complexity in an algorithm. If you compare that now to the CDG, you only have to send messages to 10 or 20 nodes. Compare the two systems and sum up the latency, you will understand very quickly why a CDG can be transferred in less than a second or very, very quick. I'll give you some benchmark of our prototypes in a sec, compared to a consensus method. By the proof of work, just as a side note, you have additionally computational complexity because it takes 10 minutes to find these, let's say, the puzzle to mine a block, but that's another topic. So Bitcoin is, you can say, by design, a latency system. Okay, but it gives you a good glimpse of why the CDGs, once you have it created, you can transfer them in less than a second. Now just one benchmark. I'll come to this topic in a sec. One benchmark from the prototypes we have is we compare two models. We say, let's say there's one node. We have one node in London and another one in Madrid. They are round about 2,000 kilometers in distance. And this causes a net latency of around about 17 milliseconds. When we are transacting a CDG, we call that the continental setting, then it takes around about 260 milliseconds. It's very, very fast. Compare that to an on-chain transaction. Transaction is really huge. We then say, or have another model, we call that the intercontinental setting. We have one node in New York and another one in Paris, and then a transaction causes a latency of around about 680 milliseconds. But you see, to be precisely, when we are looking into the communication complexity of blockchain systems, we cannot just look at the computational complexity, but also have to look into the communication complexity. And you understand, when a blockchain system is highly decentralized, the nodes are distributed around the globe, then you have additionally latency because these nodes need to send messages to each other. Okay. Just as an explanation why this works so fast, the next thing is the CDG, or this our crypto model, the Cryptographic Deposit Guarantees, do not utilize a blockchain. There is no blockchain that keeps track of the ownership of a CDG. We don't need that, because you interact always peer-to-peer with the escrow nodes. There is no need that there is a consensus in the blockchain who keeps track who owns now a CDG, because you sign a message, you're sending it to the escrow nodes, and then you express your will to send it to someone else, means to change the ownership. That means there are not 100 or 1,000 nodes included, there are just maybe roundabout, in a realistic setup, roundabout 20 nodes included. And that's crucial to understand, because you don't want to have a blockchain. A blockchain brings back block latency caused by the consensus method used, despite of which you're using proof of work, proof of stake, practical Byzantine fault tolerance agreement, all the system creating block latency. And this is what we want to get rid of, because we say CDGs are made for high frequency trading or exchange of crypto assets. There's a side effect. Sorry. There's a side effect of GDCs. With this, you can solve the scaling problem of blockchains. Just briefly explain. Scaling problem means, even, let's take now the fastest blockchain I know, it's Neo. Maybe I'm not up to date and there are some others. But they can transact around about 1,000 transactions per second. And you can bring this blockchain to a peak by simply flooding the Neo exchange, the Neo blockchain with a huge amount of transactions. Then you bring these systems up to a peak, and then it will take not a second until the reception will receive the money. It will take maybe hours. And that's the problem, what we describe as scaling. That to scale a blockchain vertically is really a challenge. I think you will agree, or from my opinion, we see now in the blockchain industry, right, that everybody's working on that problem, how to scale blockchain on a high scale and make them ready to transact maybe millions of transactions a second. That's also an important issue, by the way, I think, for the mass adoption. I think that a big economy like the United States is depending on blockchain technology. They have hundreds of millions of transactions maybe in an hour. Then you need, that is really crucial to these systems. But why CDGs solve it? Because there is no bottleneck. You can say a consensus method is a bottleneck. In the CDG transaction, you don't have any bottleneck, because we always transact peer-to-peer. Let's say, transfer my CDG to Bob, and you transfer your GDC to Clara, then this is totally separate from each other. We don't need consents each other. We are paralyzing actually this process. And because you can paralyze it, you can scale it almost infinitely. Okay. Last thing here, because often asked, is a CDG a replacement for Nakamoto's transaction model? No, it's not. It is a consequence of the Nakamoto's transaction model. But it only works on top of the blockchain. Thus, it's by design a meter system for blockchains. And for sure, it's superior to on-chain transactions, because once you have loaded a CDG with a crypto asset, you can transact it in real time through a lot of peoples, and not causing at that point any more block latency. Okay, that was the first part of the presentation. Now we are jumping into the cross-chain part, because we discussed now the intra-chain transaction. Now I want to discuss with you the cross-chain swaps, means to interact or to exchange polycryptographically. In a cryptographic way. Sorry, I need more coffee. A Bitcoin, for example, with the Ethereum, sorry, but polycryptographically. That means we do not use a trusted third party, so it's trustless. This is what atomic cross-chain swaps are about, and this is what CDGs in a cross-chain settings are about. I'll go with you also and make a little bit crash course on that, because hash time lock contracts, as they are more commonly known, are, let's say, a little bit the new technology in the blockchain or cryptosphere. So we'll jump quickly into how it works, and then have a good understanding of it, and we compare then to a cross-chain setting with CDGs. Yes, the credits go to Theo Nolan. I hope I pronounce his name correctly. He was publishing the messaging flow of an atomic cross-chain swap on the Bitcoin forum, I think a longer time ago, but now the industry starts to understand this high value. This is a hot topic, but we will see that CDGs are a little bit superior to CDGs, to atomic cross-chain swaps, not just a little, because atomic cross-chain swaps are based on on-chain transactions. But okay, let's jump into it. It's called hashed time lock contract, and this there contains, the sentence contains two words: hashed lock and time lock. Hashed time lock contract consists out of 4 on-chain transactions, and once Alice wants to send her Bitcoin, wants to exchange her Bitcoin with Bob, with Ethereum here as an example. And then she signs a message. It's called the time lock. And what she actually do is she says, I send from my wallet holding the Bitcoin to my own wallet back, and adds a condition after 48 hours. The second thing is Bob does the same thing. He also signs a time locked on-chain transaction, and he says, send my 60 Ethereum from my wallet back to my wallet in 24 hours. That's the condition. You might have heard about it. You can, like with smart contracts, also in Bitcoin, that's possible to add conditions to transactions. You'll see that the times here are stacked, and that's necessary. If you look into the flow of this contract, it's necessary you stack the time, stack the times, otherwise it will not work. Okay, this is the first part of a hash time lock contract. Both sign an on-chain transaction, and they actually say nothing else than, I send it, and then please send it back after a specific time period. The second part is the hash lock. Let's see what happens here. First, Alice is choosing a random number. It can be any number. In this case, I took a simple number 5. And only at that point, at that stage of the protocol, only Alice knows this random number. And she signs a transaction. That's now the third transaction. And she says, okay, send my Bitcoin please to Bob, but with a condition. Let's look into the condition. Only if Bob knows my random number, that's 5. But we are not expressing that or you expressed it differently. In computer science, you would like to express this condition with a hash. That means Alice is hashing her random number. She computes a hash. A hash is nothing else than a unique identification of the input value. It means if you're seeing here now this sample hash, when you're utilizing a hash algorithm and put in 5, you always get back the same hash. But it's a trapdoor function. That means nobody who's seeing this hash can ever compute back to the original input, in this case 5. Okay? This is why in a hash lock, the first condition is only if Bob knows the random number that is equal to this hash. If Bob later knows X, means the number 5, this condition will evaluate or compute to true. It's then a true statement. The second statement is, or condition, Bob signs the condition, or he actually signs that he knows X. This is a hash lock. You're actually locking the transaction and saying only if 2 conditions are met, then the receiver, Bob, and Bob is clearly mentioned here, only Bob will be able to unlock this hash lock. Then he can reveal the payment and the money gets spent from this transaction to Bob. So Alice is for sure doing the same. Sorry, Bob is doing the same. He sends his Ethereum to Alice, and he says only when Alice knows X means, or it's then equal to the hash of the at that stage unknown number, and Alice signs it. And let's see what's happening in the transaction with the hash time lock contract. Alice knows the random number. That means she can unlock Bob's hash lock transaction and can spend the money from the transaction. And now, since that is public on the public ledger, Bob can see X, the random number, and solve the hash lock transaction of Alice. Because he knows then that Alice was filling 5 to fill or to meet the condition, to met the condition here. And then Bob sees, she used 5. Let's put it in simple terms speaking. And Bob will then also be able to meet the condition of the first hash lock transaction. So this is basically how it works. And some people always say, that's cool, because when I know, or I can, let's say, brute force this hash and find the unknown number, then I can spend from the transaction. No, you cannot, because this is why the second condition is for, only when Bob signs it. And this means, in this message, the public key of Bob is included, so every node in the, for example, Bitcoin or Ethereum network will be able to verify if this statement is really coming from Bob. The same applies for Alice. Okay, that was a simple crash course about hash time lock contracts. Now, the last part is that Bob then can spend it. And now let's talk about the pros and cons of a hashed time lock transaction. It works, and it's atomic. It's atomic because after both parties set up the transactions, they need 4 on-chain transactions, they actually have nothing else to wait until one party is spending from the first hash lock transaction, and then the other party can spend from the second one. And it's with a time lock. This was why we signed the first transactions, because once nothing is happening, Alice is not revealing her random number, then the blockchain or the block nodes, the blockchain network will just send back their funds to themselves, and nothing happened. Yes, that's not a technical thing, but both blockchain needs to support the same hashing algorithm for the hash lock condition. That means you saw that the number 5 is computed with a hash. This is after they publish their transaction public in the ledger. And to make an atomic cross-chain swap work, it is necessary that all blockchain you can use with it use the same hashing function. Otherwise, it will not work. Yes, a blockchain needs to be ready for a hash time lock contract. I'll give you a quick, maybe I can click there. I had the problem already. Let's open that shortly. It is swapready.net. You will see here, we talked about that the hash, for example, needs to be ready or be the same in different blockchains. In this website is cool. It's called Swap Readiness, or swapready.com.org. You can see that .net. Sorry. You see a table that gives you an idea of how many of those blockchain already can support an atomic cross-chain swap. And that's a disadvantage, because the blockchain technology needs to be adapted. Means the developers needs to change the source code or to allow this transaction logic. And wherever you see red, it's not working. Wherever you see yellow, it's just a partial. It's partial compliant or compatible. I'm sorry, need more coffee with the hashed time lock. protocol flaw. You see, that's the problem, right? If we see green, we have the possibility to send, for example, between Bitcoin and Litecoin, it works, or others. But once we do not have an implementation on a wide area of blockchains, then we cannot use it. And that's crucial to understand when we talk about decentralized exchange technology, because a lot now are looking into atomic cross-chain swaps. The consequence of that, if you're using atomic cross-chain swaps for a decentralized exchange, then you are limited actually in the amount of coins such an exchange can offer. Okay, that's just a simple side note here. It depends on on-chain transactions. That's the core problem from my opinion, from our opinion. It's slow. It means you have the time lock. It's not the problem of the time lock. It's the problem that when we interact with atomic cross-chain swap, I sent you Bitcoin, you sent me Ethereum, then you have to wait at least 30 minutes. I have a shorter block latency because the Ethereum network is faster. But this is not practical because we think about a high-frequency trading setting. Think about professionals, they want to trade their crypto assets in a very fast manner. It is not possible with atomic cross-chain swaps, because then each party, for example, you need to wait a half an hour until you receive it. Simple example, let's say you bought 1 Bitcoin from me with your Ethereum. Now the market crashes and you want to sell it immediately. You cannot. You have to wait until it arrives in your wallet. And that's a problem, especially in the professional area. Think about it, in companies, they have high liquidity needs in a very quick time. For example, companies issuing credit cards where you can deposit, for example, the Bitcoin and then use this credit card in shops. These companies, to complete the clearing with the credit card provider, they have to make sure they will sell your Bitcoin at the moment you're using the card. And once they're using atomic cross-chain swaps in a decentralized way, they might have a high risk with this. And this might be the reason why centralized exchanges are still so popular. It's an interactive protocol. That means Bob has to be active within 48 hours to claim his coins. Because you saw the second time lock, once he does not do it, then Alice can access his Ethereum and she gets back her Bitcoin. That's also crucial to understand when we talk about hashed time lock contracts. Okay, let's solve these drawbacks of atomic cross-chain swaps and look into the cryptographic deposit guarantees in a cross-chain setting. Before we do that, we have to understand a little bit about public key cryptography. Don't worry, I'll illustrate everything. It's easy to understand. Because CDG can be any private key for every blockchain. Just as a recap, we learned that the CDG is a distributed private key that these escrow nodes hold with a common public key. The question remains, what kind of private keys the CDG can compute? It can compute all public key crypto or private key for all public key crypto systems. Let's look into that for a second. When you create a wallet, you create a key pair, despite of which blockchain you're using. All blockchains using the same building blocks or the same design concept, because your key pair express your wallet. And if you are using the most common blockchains, you're utilizing elliptical curve cryptography. So what is that? It's just a cryptography that computes these private and public key. And the majority of all blockchains using a standard that's called the SECP 256K1 standard. It's just a specific parameterization for this elliptical curve. But there are others like Edward curves or RSA. I think it's one of the oldest public key crypto systems we have. And there are not so many. So there are maybe handfuls of these crypto systems, but as said, around about 90%, we did a research by the way by this, or 90% roundabout, are using this SECP 256K1 standard, means elliptical curve cryptography, to calculate these key pairs. We, by the way, studied that or researched 50 blockchains. We were also looking in very exotic ones because we wanted to understand the distribution of the public key cryptography algorithms these blockchains are using. So, to come to a point, the distributed key generator, that is a CDG, can surely compute a private key or a key pair for elliptical curve cryptography, for Edward curves and RSA and others. And the result of this is that you can create a CDG that suits for elliptical curve, means for Bitcoin, Litecoin, all these blockchains using elliptical curve cryptography. And you can compute one for Edward curves, and you can also compute one for RSA. So that means when you are creating a CDG, you have to tell the nodes what kind of CDG you want to have. It will be very easy for users or for people, for end users, because they just say, I want to have a CDG for Bitcoin, holding Bitcoin or Ethereum. I want to have a CDG holding coins for big chain. They are using, for example, Edward curves. And then the node knows automatically what kind of crypto system they need to use. And this gives you already a good understanding why you can use a CDG in a cross-chain setting. Let's look into that. A CDG can be any private key for every blockchain. We saw, or this is just now a little sum up, the CDG for SECP 256K1 holds Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, almost every coin, black coin, all these are using the same crypto system to calculate the key pairs. There are more exotic ones using Edward curves. This here is just the specific parameterization for the Edward curves. SIA, for example, highly interesting blockchain, ScoreX, big chain. They're just using another crypto system, that's legitimate, they can do that. But you understand that the CDG needs just to calculate a different, or utilizing a different crypto system to calculate the key, the distributed private key. And this is then the key to understand the cross-chain swap. Let's say, go back, very sorry. This is the key to understand why a CDG can hold almost every crypto coin. There's just one condition to it. The blockchain of the underlying needs to have a public ledger. Because once you're sending a Bitcoin, for example, to the public key of a CDG, there's a validation layer in the crypto system of CDGs that can evaluate the value of the CDG, if there's 1 Bitcoin, 2 Bitcoin, etc. Once a blockchain does not have a public ledger, then this is not possible. So one condition is for a CDG that you can hold every crypto asset that has, or the respective blockchain of the underlying has a public ledger. Just one example, Zcash would not rework. There are theoretical models to do this, but it will not work because they don't have a public ledger. It's totally encrypted. They only work with zero knowledge proofs. But as said, we want to focus with the CDG. The 90% of all, it's even more, 95 is my guess, 95% of all blockchain, they have a public ledger. Okay. Now let's look into the transaction flow, how a CDG is exchanged in a cross-chain setting or as a cross-chain swap. First of all, here's Alice. She has a CDG holding a Bitcoin. Bob has a CDG holding Ethereum. And both have the key pairs that guarantees them to control the CDG or express their ownership of the CDG. what they're doing is they're assigning a message. We call that swap agreement, a CDG swap agreement. And once they sign that message, which expresses the will of Alice and Bob to exchange their CDGs, then the transaction is completed. We'll look into this in detail in the next slide. But the outcome, once the transaction is completed, is that here it's shortly illustrated, that the Alice CDG is owned by this blue public key because she has the private key to it. And each node, each escrow node, knows the public key of Alice. So Alice will always be able to express or prove the ownership to these nodes of their secret share. And the outcome is, the same for sure applies for Bob, and is that they exchange this key, this public key that expresses the ownership of the CDG. Okay, now let's jump into the CDG swap agreement, what is about. There's a little mistake in the illustration, doesn't matter. Everything is Alice initiate a swap, and she does that. I'm a little bit confused, but imagine this is not here. That's a mistake in the illustration. The CDG swap agreement is also, like you saw in the on-chain transaction, a text message. You can say, in simply speaking, it's a text message. And it contains two conditions. We'll look at that in a moment. It takes an output that means what to do, what we want to achieve. We talked about that. We want to change ownership. And both parties need to sign that. So Alice starts with that, and she signs that message. As said, imagine Bob was not yet signing it. And then she sends this message to Bob. And Bob takes, like in the hash lock, as you saw in the atomic cross-chain swap, Bob just takes a random number, any number it can be. In this case, he says, my secret number is 5. And if you look into the condition of this message, the first condition is we want to say this message is only valid if both parties were signing it. And the second condition is that Alice and Bose knows the random selected number of Bob. And as you were already seen with hashlock transactions, we are putting here the hash. But to be more precisely, maybe you have heard that also in the context of atomic cross-chain swaps, we can use also the idea of a blank hash, so we don't have to fill it for now, because Alice doesn't know the random number. She sends the signed message to Bob, and Bob then puts in the hash, and to prove that Bob knows the random number, he has also to sign this condition with the random number. Then he sends back the message to Alice along with his random number, and then Alice can sign the second condition. Because we say Alice and Bob knows the random number and they both signed it. Why we are doing this? Just for a simple reason. We want to make cryptographically sure that both parties, Alice and Bob, have a copy of this message which both parties were signing. Okay, that's why we're doing this thing with the random number. For that reason, it's here included. Okay, then we understand the swap agreement. Let's now look at the actual transaction flow. We have Alice and Bob. Both have now a copy, and we know for sure, cryptographically secure, that both have a signed copy of each party. And both hold their CDGs. For now, nothing changed. But you will see now something will happen. I was choosing here different colors. Green is the color for the escrow nodes holding the secret share of Alice CDG. The same applies here for Bob, just chosen a red color. Because what happens is they are sending this swap agreements to the nodes holding the secret shares of the respective CDG. And what actually happens is, you can imagine that these nodes will organize themselves in a circular order, right? What I actually do is just an illustration, but it's that you can understand it better. What it will do is, we're starting with this first process. Alice and Bob will send this message, the signed message, the swap agreement, to randomly one of those nodes. And for security reasons, they can send it to any number of those nodes. They can select this by themselves. It's just because of a simple theoretical model. If you just send it to one party, and this node, or this to one escrow node, and this escrow node is going down, well, then it's a probability that the other will not get a copy, because that is what now happening. Once one node is receiving the swap agreement, which is signed, he can validate it, that there's a will of both parties to swap the CDG. Then they're organized themselves, the escrow nodes, and will send this message from one node to another, right, in a round-robin way, like this. And what they do is, once a node receives that, they sign it. And once this agreement is signed by at least a threshold of the escrow nodes, then they will activate the swap. It just makes sure, because to reveal a private key of a CDG, a threshold at least is necessary. So with this process, it's very similar, like if you compare that, for example, to the messaging flow of a proof of stake. It's actually the same is happening, but in a proof of stake you're sending the block and a lot of validators are signing it. Here you're sending the swap agreement. It's the same concept behind it. And once then all nodes see the signed swap agreement of at least a threshold, they will activate the swap. Okay, that's actually, to say what we actually do is, simply speaking, these escrow nodes holding the secret shares of both parties, they're using a simple consensus method that they can make sure that the swap is guaranteed. In case there is, that's just a theoretical model as well, if there is no threshold guaranteed, the escrow nodes will not swap the secret share. Okay, let's analyze a little bit what we have here. The first part, this exchange of the swap agreement, it refers to the trade execution. From this point on, the whole transaction is atomic, because once Bob and Alice sends the agreement to one of these, at least one of these escrow nodes, they start automatically to organize themselves, doing the consensus method, and then swap the ownership. So this last part refers to the clearing. That means when you're looking a little bit into trading, and a trade has always an execution, a clearing, and a settlement. And here you see the two parts. The settlement of the asset or the underlying of a CDG refers to the process when you are getting back or revealing the private key from the CDG. Okay, let's look into the pros and cons of a CDG swap. First, it works and it's atomic. That means the same concept you have with an atomic cross-chain swap. And no on-chain transaction is needed. That is the core. Once you got that, you understand why you can exchange these CDGs in real time. As said, we discussed it already. In a consensus method, you have to have a communication complexity, a higher communication complexity, because a lot of messages needs to send across a lot of nodes. In our example now, we just sent messages to around about 20 nodes, and thus the communication complexity is lower. This is a pool off-chain transaction. We'll look into this in a second, because the Bitcoin in our example and the Ethereum, when you look at the blockchain explorer or the blockchain of these two assets, the coins you exchanged here are not moving, right? They're still in the same block. No on-chain transaction is signed. That is by our definition, an off-chain transaction. The communication complexity is low, thus the CDG can be exchanged in real time, less than a second. We talked all about that already. It's non-interactive, that's interesting, because in the hashed time lock contract, Bob needs to act within 48 hours, otherwise the time lock transaction gets activated. In our example, it is just interactive. Sorry, that's not right. It's non-interactive because Alice signs the message, sends to Bob. It's asynchronously. That means they don't have to be connected to each other in a synchronous way. She can then react again when she gets back the CDG swap agreement, and once both parties have a signed copy of it, which the cryptography makes sure I present it to you, it does not matter if just Alice or just Bob or both send this swap agreement to the nodes. Once a node receives it, he has a complete verified instruction what to do. And then he organizes a consensus of the escrow nodes holding the different key shares. Okay, that's a non-interactive protocol. Yeah, we talked about that. It only works with blockchain that has a public ledger to verify the value of a CDG. Approximately 95%. To be honest, we study 50 blockchains, but the majority is using cryptographic elliptical curve. Maybe you know others, but it's elliptical curve. Sorry, having a public ledger. This is about. Yeah, maybe you know some other blockchains, they don't have a public ledger. Post them or just give that in the comments. I'm very interested. But this is the precondition of a CDG swap. I think it doesn't care. We are focused on the 90 or 95% roundabout of all blockchain they have and using the distributed ledger technology. Good. Let's just clarify something. Last time I just illustrated here what means really off-chain. That's crucial to understand when we look into cryptographic deposit guarantees. Off-chain means when the CDG is made for high frequency setting. Once you load and create a CDG, you can transact it through an unlimited number of persons. And the interesting part is, once you do so, from one person to another, to another, to another, to another, the asset, the underlying that is bound in the CDG is not moving in the underlying blockchain of the respective coin or underlying of the CDG. That is an off-chain transaction. That's the idea of the CDG. It's not moving. This is why you have no on-chain transaction, and this is why we do not cause any block latency. Yeah, I was here seminar and it said the underlying of a CDG always stays unmoved in the blockchain of the underlying. That is what actually happens. This is what off-chain means. Another question, how you can exchange any quantities with CDGs. Because when you followed up with me until that point, and we introduced the problem already when we were looking into the meter swap model, then we found that we cannot exchange exact quantities with these CDGs because we can put in 1 Bitcoin and 50 Ethereum and exchange that. But what if I just want, to exchange 0.2 Bitcoin against 1 Ethereum? How to do this? Or how to exchange exact quantities? Let's say Alice has 0.3 Bitcoin. What she does is she creates, in this case, 3 CDGs holding each 0.1 Bitcoin. That's no problem, right? It's just 3 distributed private keys. You have 3 public keys, and you're sending your Bitcoin or the 0.1 to each of the CDG. And what you're actually doing is, we call that or refer to fragmentation. You fragment your Bitcoin into CDGs that are practical to exchange. There's Bob. That's a mistake here. That should be Bob. Bob is doing the same. He has, let's say, 2 Ethereum and sending it to 2 CDGs holding each 1 Ethereum. Just as a side note, the software, the client that you can use to execute a CDG or to create it, when you are sending 0.3 Bitcoin, it will split the Bitcoin up automatically. And when you're into Bitcoin transactions, you know that this is one Bitcoin transaction with one input and 3 outputs, right? So you have one transaction here to split up the your Bitcoin into several CDGs. And with this, we solved the problem that we cannot exchange exact quantities. For sure, you're right, there's a limit. It doesn't make sense to send a single Satoshi into a CDG. But you can have centibitcoins, millibitcoins into a CDG, or you just put 0.0001 ETC in one CDG, and that makes actually the exchange very practical. Just as a side note, and just give a simple look in our white paper of, it's called, by the way, tokrex meter system for real-time intra and cross-chain swaps. And we present here, let me see, a real-time transaction that is different from those I showed you, because the transaction model I showed you for a CDG cross-chain swap is easy to explain, and it works, and we're using it in prototypes. By the way, I will make an excitement statement about that announcement, because we will put these prototypes out, these alpha versions, so you can play around with this exciting technology yourself. But just to mention, there is some detail, we were not talking about it. Let's say here as an example, you hold, these are 6 nodes holding the key shares. There's a potential attack vector to this CDG, because let's assume there's an adversary that can compromise all secret shares. That's bad, because then he can access the underlying. In the white paper, we present a real-time transaction model. It's a little bit more sophisticated. I don't want to bother you now with, we're using here an encrypt and swap scheme by Goldfeather, and this utilizes zero knowledge proofs, etc. You can read that. But the advantage of that model is that Alice actually holds, that's now a detail, holds an additional private key. The result of this is that even if those key shares gets compromised, the attacker cannot do, or the hacker, let's say, cannot do anything with the key shares, because he needs additionally a private key that Alice holds to access it. So that's just a side note. When you're reading the white paper, you might find a different transaction model here. And it works a little bit different, but it actually does the same. Okay. Yeah, last thing. We talked about it, that it's very often asked question, how get back my underlying when I have 1 Bitcoin in there? We talked about that. Since you hold a keypad to control the CDG, you prove to the escrow nodes that you are the owner of it. Then they send you the secret shares back. And what you do is, it's purely mathematical algebra, that you can add up these secret shares, and you get back the private key that actually gives you access to these underlying. For sure, we talked about that. You just need a threshold of it. Okay, we finally very quickly compare a CDG to a hash time lock cross-chain contract. And I think it's very obvious, if you follow it up, that atomic cross-chain swaps utilizing on-chain transactions, and that means whenever you transact, when you do a cross-chain swap with a Bitcoin against an Ethereum, you have to wait until the Bitcoin arrives because of the clock latency, and just then you can trade again your Bitcoin with another party, and it also causes clock latency. So you have actually the same drawback as in on-chain transactions. If you compare that with the CDC swaps, for sure, you always have one on-chain transaction to load it, to send your crypto coin to the public key of the CDG. But once you have done it, you can transact it through almost an unlimited number of persons without almost no latency. And that's why a CDG cross-chain is superior to a hash time lock contract in a high frequency setting. And that is what we're working toward. We want to have a decentralized exchange technology that enables the benefits, this comfort of trading in real time on markets. And the cool thing is, I think you'll agree with me, is that the CDG really bounds the underlying. It is the underlying. We are trading the Bitcoin, the Ethereum. Because other decentralized exchange technology, they have, for example, a concept, they tokenize assets, right? For example, look at the high-priced exchanges now. You deposit there your Bitcoin, then you can trade it in a decentralized manner. And they give you a token, and with this token, you can then trade decentralized. But you always need actually a central entity that will convert back the token to the underlying. And that's, in our opinion, doesn't make a lot of sense, because there's a lot of sense of or space for fraud in these things, as we have, for example, seen with Tether and so on. Decentralized technology, exchange technology is hot. Look, for example, to Binance. They are already also working on it. They're using a totally different approach. They are developing a blockchain. On this blockchain, you can then trade tokens. But as said, the blockchain has the disadvantage, the drawback, that it causes latency. And it is really, from the perspective of software engineering or from the perspective of security engineering, really challenging to have a blockchain that can transact very, very fast. I would say now, maybe someone proves me wrong, that there is mathematically a limit to around about 2 to 3 seconds of a block time, even if you find or utilizing technology that allows you to scale the blockchain vertically. Okay, it's CDG is optimal for decentralized real-time trading in a high-frequency trading or setup. This presentation, we showed you a CDM based on hash locks. Yeah, we discussed it. I showed you already our white paper that we are using a little bit different conception for the real-time swap. And by the way, when you're exchanging, let's say, it's another question I'm remembering. People ask, when I have 4 CDGs and I want, let's hold, for example, each a millibitcoin, and I want to exchange it with someone who holds 2 or 1 Ethereum in his CDG, and you want to swap that, what you actually swap is you're swapping or you're trading not just one CDG for another. You maybe then trade 4 CDGs holding your millibitcoin against 1 CDG holding the Ethereum or another altcoin. Okay, also there was changing ownership does not require blockchain. We had that already. It's fully peer-to-peer. That is one of the it's highly interesting that makes it so fast, and this is why you can parallelize the project, the transactions. More to discuss. What if not enough nodes are available to reveal a private key? We're discussing about that. When you're looking now white paper, the crypto system, tokrex, the crypto system where these CDGs are living in, is utilizing another crypto system. I don't want to go into detail because you can read it, and it's then a hard time to illustrate. I think we talked already a lot. It's called proactive secret sharing, and just that you know what it does. The nodes, the escrow nodes holding a key share, the secret shares, in a specific time interval, they will swap these secret shares with another cluster of escrow nodes, just to ensure that you always have enough nodes holding your secret shares. Yeah, in the white paper we are using an encrypted swap instead of, this we're using in the white paper a different a transaction model, but the hash lock, or the better, let's say, this is a little bit the old term, we say now the swap agreement. That is something you will find the prototypes, so we'll put them to GitHub so you can play around with this highly exciting technology. It uses this concept because it's very easy and it's more easy to explain. How to verify the value of a CDG, we talked about that. It's also important. This is because CDGs have a limit. They only work with blockchain with a public ledger. There's you will find also information about that in the white paper, a validation layer. It's nothing else than a distributed, actually a distributed blockchain API, you could say, that enables you to verify the value of a public key of a CDG. So we know in the end how much values or coins are bound to a CDG. Why I ever should reveal my private key from a CDG? All I want is real-time transactions. Coins so fast as emails. That's right. That's an interesting question. The only because the argument against it is when you're looking into the tokrex decentralized network that provides you the CDG and allows you real-time cross-chain and intra-chain transactions, these nodes holding your key shares or your secret shares, they will get a fee for it. It will be very, very low, but anyway, if you hold them up for, let's say, a year or so, then the cost for sure will increase to hold a CDG. But you're totally right when you ask the question, because all what we want is to send our coins in real time, like fastest email, and we change totally the perspective of blockchain because we fragment it with CDGs actually, and we are using them just to hold the crypto asset, because they have the consensus method we need. As said, it's just a meter system for blockchain, not a substitute for it. And yeah, that the community, you will actually decide how long CDGs you will hold them, because the longer you hold and make more transaction with it, the higher value for you is, right? Okay. There is no mining, and how escrow nodes gets paid for their service. It's a smart contract. Yes, it's definitely a smart contract, because you can say you give them the secret share of your private key, and once they're holding it up until a specific time period, they get a little fee in a coin we call toks, and this is how they get paid. They are not paid for mining. They are getting paid for delivering the service and holding the secret share until the point they are sharing the secret share with a new cluster of node in a new circle. Means proactive secret sharing, and then they get paid for this. But as expected, this will be very low, because the escrow nodes can handle thousands of these secret shares, even millions, because that's a very tiny piece of information. Okay, I have to thank you very much. I hope it was very exciting for you, because I think you never heard about that. Cryptographic Deposit Guarantees. It's hot. It's maybe the next big thing I would say it is the next big thing, because it's superior to atomic cross-chain swaps. It's superior to on-chain transactions. You can reach me out if you have questions. My email address is tom.mayer@tokrex.org. We're currently launching this project and have a fundraising. So our project needs the support of the crypto community. If you like that exciting stuff, jump to our website. We are preparing an ICO. We're having maybe already in the time you're watching the video an ICO. Go there. The utility token we are issuing has a high need, because with that you can use the CDGs. And on top of this technology, we built up the the first real-time decentralized exchange. Yeah, if you just like our work, or you for sure can donate, I added here my BTC address, my public key for sure, and sure it's a public address of a CDG. So thank you very much for your attention. We'll see next time. There's nothing, just a set exciting announcement. We'll put some alpha code right to the GitHub so that you can play around with that by yourself. And I will do another, when the next time to come, in the next weeks, I will put out another presentation And it's about a technology we call FloorNet. We not just developed a totally new concept for real-time transactions, we also modeled or developed a model for decentralized order matching. But that's another thing. Thank you very much. Have a fantastic day. See you. Bye-bye. Tokrex.org. I forgot where to go. Sorry. That's the website. Check it out.